Today, I would like to share two studies on how people interact with media character. One is a study of video gameplay, and the other one is on the analysis of TV show viewers' comments on Twitter. Let's look at the first study now. In video games, we often see the main characters in video games are heroes or the people who fight to save lives, help others, and keep the world safe. The main characters are usually those who do things that fit our moral standards. It sort of makes sense to us that we want to make ourselves look good to others, and playing and imagining ourselves as a hero and doing good things as a hero may make us feel good. Video games then provide players a chance to explore their different identities, and people could feel rewarded from doing something good. Playing a morally justified character might also be a strategy to enjoy playing violent video games for some players. Take shooting games, for example. Players will have to shoot at the opponent in order to fulfill the task, and lots of games portray vivid and explicit injuries from the shooting and killing. Conducting those behaviors in video games may violate players' moral standards, and they may feel guilty. According to Bandura, individuals develop moral standards to guide their own thoughts and behaviors. The inconsistency between moral standards and their behaviors will cause the feeling of guilt. These feelings may be disengaged through several mechanisms, such as moral justification. Moral justification provides as a coping system for people to justify their immoral behaviors. For example, if you are committing violence because you are saving a life or to save the world, it's okay. In an interview, Klein found that some players said that they need to be a hero or a good person in violent games in order to enjoy the game. However, some players might experience high sensational arousal in video games from being a villain. They could commit violence as they like and hurt innocent people with no reason, and they are able to do that in video games without any consequences, and they could still be a morally good person in a real life. In order to taste this study look at how players judge the morality of the game characters by looking at three conditions. One is to observe how people play morally unjustified characters in violent games. One is to play a morally justified character in violent games. And the third one is to play a justified character in non-violent games. It is hypothesized that because violence committed by villains are considered morally unjustified in violent games, participants who play villains will have the highest level of guilt and will enjoy the game the least. And the people in the non-violent condition will feel the least guilty and enjoy the game the most because they don't commit violent behaviors and they are playing as a good role in video games. The third hypothesis looks at identification. Those who play criminals will identify with character less than those who play morally justified characters. Gender differences is also examined in the study, and we could see from the literature that males generally enjoy violent games more than females. Bandura suggested that males are more capable of having the coping mechanisms and provide moral justifications than women, so they could feel less guilty of playing the unjustified characters than women. The games used in the study are male characters, so similar to previous TV research findings, people will identify with the same-sex characters more. In the study, 104 students were recruited. 2 games were used in each of the conditions. Participants were randomly assigned to play one video game in a specific condition for 20 minutes. In the violent, unjustified condition, 2 games were selected. 25 to Life is the third-person shooting game, allows participants to either choose to play the role of police officer or a criminal. So this game is used in the justified and unjustified condition by switching different rules in the game. True Crime is an action game. In this condition, participants receive an instruction saying that their task is to stop gangsters from successfully trading drugs and to protect the life of his partner. In the violent unjustified condition, two games is also used in this condition. They are 25 to Life and Sense Roll. Sense Roll is an action game. Participants in this condition receive the instruction saying that the character you're playing is a gangster whose task is to trade the drugs and escape from the police. In the non-violent justified condition, two games are used in this condition. The first one is Top Spin. It's a tennis game. And the other one is a third-person puzzle action game. In Beautiful Katamari Tamashi game, participants receive instructions saying that the character you're playing is Prince Nico, whose task is to roll up a ball to collect objects until the ball is big enough to save the world. It is similar to the default game storyline. Participants were asked how much they feel guilty after playing the game. Manipulation check was used to look at justification of character's task. The results showed that the character's task in the violent unjustified condition is the least justified. This graph shows that the effects of gender and the condition on feeling of guilt. There's no significant interaction effect, and there's no effect on gender. There was a significant main effect on the conditions. Participants feel less guilty when playing the morally justified characters in the non-violent games. There is no difference between the gangster and the police condition. This graph shows the results of the effect of gender and the three conditions on enjoyment. There was a significant interaction effect. Females enjoy playing justified characters in the non-violent games. There is no difference between conditions for males. Also look at the unjustified condition. Males enjoy the game significantly more than females. Here are the effects of the conditions on identification. There is a significant effect for gender. The males identified with the male game characters more than females. There is also a significant effect for conditions. Participants identify with the gangster character less than the other two conditions. In this study, we found that people judge the task of the characters on whether it's justified or not, based on characters' motivation and the nature of the behaviors. Violence in video games could cause guilt to the players just like in the real world. This study looks at how players' control character influence players' gaming experiences, but sometimes we do not only focus on our attention in one character. For example, when we watch TV, our attention shifts between the characters during the show. This is what the next study is focusing on. In this study, we propose that media engagement is a function of involvement with multiple characters. Let's look at a comic here. If we look at this character, we don't have much idea of what this story is about. But if we look at another character in the story, the whole story is more clear. So when we watch TV, we don't put our attention at one character, but shifting between the characters. And we also look at the interaction of the characters. We also make our predictions based on the reactions of the characters. So in this study, we look at narrative engagement and how they relate to character interaction. In here, narrative engagement is similar to transportation. Transportation is based on Garrick's suggestion that in reading a text, someone can become absorbed in the narrative and be transported into the story world, feeling like being in the story and feels like the real world are inaccessible. In media studies, we usually look at how audiences interact or respond toward their favorite character, whether they identify with the protagonist in the movie or have parasocial interaction with their favorite characters. But this would be an extreme type of interaction. What is more common is what we call vicarious interaction. Through vicarious interaction, audience members take the roles of various characters alternatively and reciprocally, and through this interaction, they could better understand the narrative better, just like the comic strip we just saw. In vicarious interaction, audience are like involved spectator, follow the interaction of the show, but not to the point that they actually feel like they are the characters of the show. Horton and Strauss, for example, indicate that vicarious interaction is the most common form of interaction for many program genres. In order to understand how audience members are involved in the vicarious interaction and how they process a narrative, Swan suggested a situation model to explain the process. When reading a story, people form mental representation of the people, events, location of the story, and then we construct a situation model in order to comprehend the narrative. Swan suggested that there are different types of indices in the situation model, like time, location, characters, causality of the story, and the motives or goals of actions. Audience update each index frequently. When an incoming effect is causally unrelated to the previous one, the audience will update the causality index. When a new character is introduced with a new scene, we update our protagonist index. When an incoming action introduces a new goal structure, the motivational index requires updating. When we update the indexes, we make inferences or predictions of the story based on our own experiences. Narrative comprehension is the construction of an accurate dynamic situation models, which depends on how much information you know from the character, their goals, and their actions. Successful construction of the model is highly influenced by our ability to sort out relevant versus irrelevant details in the story, that is, paying attention when it matters. We then form our hypothesis looking at narrative engagement and whether audience shift their focus between multiple characters. If narrative comprehension requires a shifting between characters and situations, as engagement in the narrative increases, we could see an increase in taking the perspective of multiple characters. And we could also see an increase in references to the self as narrative engagement increases. Perspective taking is the tendency to spontaneously adopt the psychological point of view of others. So a person would think about how he or she might be responding to the experiencing when seeing somebody in a particular situation. Studies have shown that perspective taking increases the activation of an individual's self-concept, and additional work has indicated that perspective taking is associated with emotional connections to a character's motivations and goal. So our hypothesis 3 is to look at perspective taking, and it should be linked to stronger emotional reactions. We use thought listing techniques. We ask students to watch a selected TV show at home on TV while they are being broadcasted and tweet what they are thinking during the commercial break. The shows selected are Smash, The River, and NYC-22. Smash is talking about developing a new musical for Broadway. The River explores supernatural events on the Amazon River. NYC-22 is set in a New York City police department and look at police officers and how they fight with criminals. The participants fill out a baseline questionnaire, then they watch the first episode of a show, tweet during the commercial break, and fill out a survey afterwards. Then they do it for 3 weeks. Engagement is measured by a 12-item narrative engagement scale. Affective valence and arousal are measured by the core affect scale. Emotional reaction, self-reference, perspective taking, and diversity of character mentions in tweets are coded. We then have 3,279 thoughts, including plots, prediction, character mentions, questions, self-reference, and perspective taking. Here is the result of narrative engagement across episodes of the 3 shows. Here is the emotional responses to each program. NYC 22, a police drama, has more aggressive thoughts. Smash is the most affectionate. The River, which reflected a more fantasy science fiction theme, was very low in all the emotions. The results of our study show that there may be particular aspects of programs and episodes in which engagement is related to diversity of character mentions. Examination of the between subject effects indicates significant program effects for expressiveness and anxiety, significant perspective taking main effects for affection, aggression, and glory, and marginally significant interaction effects for aggression and glory. Our analysis of the emotional content of the tweet suggests that perspective taking is associated with emotions associated with interpersonal interaction, aggression and affection, as well as glory. Programs, on the other hand, appear to be associated with similarities in anxiety and expressiveness, which is more individualized, less social emotional responses. In this study, we found that audience members track different characters' motivations, goals, thoughts, and have emotional connections with the characters. Some shows may elicit more character interaction thoughts or self-thoughts than others. So what do we know so far when we interact with media characters? We know that the nature of characters make a difference. In the video game study, audience make a moral judgment toward the motivations of the character, and their entertainment experiences change because of that. In our TV study, we also know that audience not only focus on one character, but they pay attention to multiple characters at the same time. Narrative and context also need to be considered when we look at character interaction. In video game study, we see that violence levels of the game influences players' perceptions toward the characters, their gaming experiences, and affective responses. In the TV study, we see some shows may allow viewers shift their attention between characters more than some shows. We also know that media users matter as well. Gender make a difference in our video game study, and people who have more perspective-taking thoughts may have more emotional responses toward the show. In general, there are still a lot to be explored, and all the factors are intertwined. We can see that the process of media engagement and character interaction is a complex, dynamic process. In a future study, it will be interesting to look at the dynamic changes of the situation models, the interaction between the factors, and look at a model that could better explain the process of the character interaction. Thank you for your time.